The air inside the glass-walled showroom felt electric, thick with perfume, polished steel, and anticipation. Flashbulbs burst in rapid-fire bursts, casting brief, blinding glints off the candy apple red supercar in the center of the stage. Ava Sinclair stood beside it, her hand resting on the smooth curve of the hood, the posture of a queen unveiling her crown jewel. It was supposed to be flawless. Months of design, engineering, and secrecy had led to this single moment a live launch, broadcast to millions, in front of an audience of investors, journalists, and critics. And then it happened. The car coughed. Once, twice. Then, the sleek engine that had purred so perfectly backstage gave a violent sputter and fell into silence. The hum of conversation stopped mid-breath. Cameras kept rolling. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone camera zoomed in, ready to capture Sinclair Motors' humiliation in 4 Kelvin clarity. Ava's face didn't flinch, but her pulse spiked. Somewhere in the back, she caught the satisfied smirk of Damian Cross, leaning in his front row seat like a man savoring a drink he'd been saving for years. A voice cut through the silence. "I can fix it." It wasn't one of her engineers. It came from near the back, a man in oil-stained jeans, a gray t-shirt, and work boots that looked more suited to a garage floor than a showroom floor. Mason Cole stepped forward, his eyes steady, almost calm. A ripple of amusement swept through the audience. A few laughed under their breath. Ava almost did too. This was a $1 million prototype, not an old pickup truck. She tilted her head, her tone as sharp as her tailored black blazer. "If you can fix this before the cameras stop rolling, I'll marry you. Deal?" It was meant as a joke, a barbed one, something to diffuse the tension with a little arrogance. Mason didn't laugh. He didn't hesitate. Deal. The word hung in the air like a challenge. A murmur ran through the room. "Somewhere," someone whispered. "Is he serious?" Before she could retract the line, Mason was already at the car. One of her engineers, flustered and red-faced, tried to block him, but Mason's voice cut in low and confident. 5 minutes. I won't hurt her." Ava found herself watching, arms crossed, as he popped the hood and disappeared into the engine bay. His hands moved with a rhythm that wasn't rushed but decisive, like a man who'd lived his life in the language of machinery. Tools clinked. Wires shifted. A faint smell of fuel mingled with the showroom's polished scent. 3 minutes in, Mason paused, listening. Not to the crowd, to the car. Then he adjusted one last component, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stepped back. "Try it now," he said, eyes meeting hers. Ava hesitated, part of her wanted him to fail. But when she pressed the ignition, the engine came alive with a deep, flawless roar. The crowd erupted in applause, and cameras surged closer, desperate to capture the man who had just saved the launch. Ava's smirk faltered for the first time that night. She didn't like surprises, and Mason Cole was nothing but one. She told herself it was just a fluke, that he'd fixed the problem and walked out of her life. But as he turned to leave, the echo of his voice, "Deal," stayed with her. She didn't yet know that this moment had just set the course for both their lives to collide in ways neither could have predicted. And, somewhere in the shadows, Damian Cross was already planning how to turn this unexpected twist to his advantage. The applause was still echoing when Mason slipped through the side exit, the showroom's golden lights spilling briefly into the cool night before the door swung shut behind him. Outside, the air was different, damp with the scent of rain on asphalt, quieter, except for the muffled roar of the crowd inside. He didn't linger. No victory lap, no basking in attention. Just long, purposeful strides toward the street, where his battered pickup waited like an old friend. Behind him, the door banged open. Voices chased him into the night reporters, their heels clattering, cameras bouncing on their shoulders. "Sir, who are you? Are you with Sinclair Motors? Was that marriage line real?" Mason didn't answer. He simply climbed into the driver's seat, started the truck with a rumble that sounded like history, and pulled into the stream of city traffic. Back inside, Ava watched him go through the tinted glass. She told herself it was curiosity, not whatever else it was. Men like him didn't belong in her world. They didn't stand on stages worth millions of dollars and make promises they couldn't possibly mean, and yet there had been something in his voice. Steady, unshaken. Her head of engineering approached, his expression strained. "We still need to know what went wrong with the—" "I'll handle it," Ava said, sharper than she intended. But as the evening wore on, the victory felt hollow. The car had purred like a dream when Mason touched it like it wanted to please him. And she hated that thought. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Grease-stained hero saves Sinclair Motors launch. Mystery mechanic and CEO's marriage dare go viral. 1,000 images flooded the internet. Mason under the hood. Mason wiping his hands on his jeans. Mason looking right at her with eyes that seemed to see past her corporate armor. Her assistant found her in her office, holding out a tablet. "We have a name. Mason Cole. Runs a place called Cole's Auto on the east side. Small. Looks like it's just him and an 8-year-old boy." A boy. Something in Ava's chest tightened. She told herself she didn't care. But an hour later, her driver was steering the sleek black sedan toward a quiet street lined with faded shop fronts. Cole's Auto looked exactly how she'd imagined corrugated metal siding. An old neon sign missing a letter. A yard cluttered with cars in varying states of hope and ruin. She stepped inside. The smell was oil and rubber with a faint trace of coffee. Mason was there, bent over the open hood of a dusty sedan, sleeves pushed to his elbows. The boy, Ethan, she guessed, sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, assembling some kind of model engine with tiny, careful hands. They both looked up when she entered. "You came," Mason said. No surprise in his tone, just quiet acknowledgement. Ava held his gaze. "We need to talk about last night." Mason wiped his hands, nodding toward a corner of the shop where a battered desk sat under a flickering light. "Figured we might." Ethan's eyes flicked between them, curious but wary. Ava noticed the way Mason's hand lingered briefly on his son's shoulder as they passed a subtle, protective gesture that didn't fit with the picture she'd painted of him in her mind. Sitting across from him, she realized she didn't just want to know how he fixed the car. She wanted to know who he was. And she wasn't sure why that unsettled her more than anything. Because part of her suspected the answer wouldn't let her walk away so easily. The flickering light above Mason's desk cast a restless shadow over his face, catching the faint streaks of gray in his dark hair. He sat back in his chair, calm, but not exactly welcoming. Ava could feel the invisible wall he kept between them, the same kind she'd built for years. But his seemed older, worn smooth from long use. "You didn't just fix a loose wire last night," she began, leaning forward. "That engine had been tuned for a precision launch. Even my team didn't spot the fault." Mason met her gaze without flinching. Sometimes people get too close to the problem to see it. It wasn't arrogance, it was simply true, and she hated that it was. She searched his expression for any hint of smugness and found none. "I need to know," she pressed, "how you knew exactly what to do." He took a slow breath, eyes flicking briefly toward the open garage door, as if weighing whether to answer at all. "Let's just say, I used to be on the other side of the showroom." Her eyes narrowed. "Corporate side?" "Engineering," his voice dropped, almost lost under the hum of the overhead light. "Biggest years of my career were at Cross Automotive." The name landed between them like a piece of shrapnel. Ava knew better than most that Damian Cross didn't just fire people, he dismantled them. "What happened?" she asked. Mason's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't speak, and Ava was about to withdraw the question when he said, "A design flaw, one I caught early. I reported it. They buried it. Months later, a crash killed 2 people. Damien made sure my name was the one on the report." A bitter silence filled the air. Ava had fought Damien in boardrooms, but she'd never seen the wreckage he left in people's lives. Ethan's voice broke the moment, calling from the other side of the shop. "Dad? You said we could get lunch." Mason's eyes softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at his son. "Give me 5 minutes, champ." The boy nodded and went back to his model engine, hands steady, focused. Ava couldn't help noticing the same precision, the same patience as his father. "You're a single parent," she said quietly. Mason didn't hide it. Since Ethan was 2, his mom passed in a car accident. Now, her parents, they're trying to take him. The way he said it, not angry, but stripped raw, made something in Ava shift. She knew what it was to fight for what mattered, to not trust anyone else to protect it. "You think Damien's involved in this?" she asked. "I don't think," Mason said, meeting her eyes again. "I know, and if you're smart, you'll keep your distance before he uses you to get to me." She should have left then. Should have nodded politely, walked back to her car, and locked this strange, inconvenient man out of her life. Instead, she found herself saying, "Or I could do the opposite." For the first time, Mason looked genuinely surprised. "Meaning," Ava said, "if he's coming for you, he's coming for me too, and I don't like losing." They didn't shake hands, didn't make some grand agreement, but the air between them shifted. A quiet understanding settled in the kind that came not from trust, but from recognizing the same fire in someone else. Outside, clouds were gathering, heavy and dark. And somewhere across the city, Damien Cross was already adjusting his plans, the corners of his mouth curving into the faintest smile. The rain came first fat, heavy drops slapping against the corrugated roof of Cole's auto until the sound filled every corner of the shop. Ava had just stepped outside to take a call when her phone buzzed with a different kind of alert, a private message from one of her most trusted contacts in the industry. "Watch the market. Cross is moving against you." She didn't need details to know what it meant. Damien Cross had never been subtle. She slipped back inside, but before she could tell Mason, the sound of tires crunching on wet gravel made them both look toward the open bay door. A black sedan slid to a stop, its windows tinted dark enough to turn daylight into shadow. 2 men stepped out, the kind who carried umbrellas not for the rain, but for the briefcase, one of them guarded. Mason's shoulders stiffened. "Stay here," he told Ethan, who had been happily testing his model engine. But the boy's eyes darted to Ava, uncertain. She gave him the smallest nod, a silent promise that she'd keep watch. The taller of the 2 men stepped forward, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Cole, Damien sends his regards. Thought you might want to see the paperwork before things escalate." Mason didn't touch the envelope they held out. "What is it?" "Custody petition. Emergency hearing. Court date's been moved up." The man's grin deepened. "Tomorrow morning." Ava caught the flicker in Mason's expression, not fear, but the kind of calculation she'd seen in high-stakes negotiations. "You can tell, Damien," Mason said evenly, "that I'll be there, and that I'm not backing down." The men left without another word, their sedan disappearing into the rain. Mason shut the bay door and leaned against it, hands braced on the cold metal. "This is how he works," Mason said finally. "Doesn't come at you head-on. He takes what you care about until you break." Ava had no children, but she knew what it was to have everything you'd built threatened by someone who didn't deserve to win. She stepped closer, her voice low. "Then we hit back before he can." "How?" Mason asked, not mocking her, genuinely asking. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crossed to his desk, flipping open her laptop. "I have friends in legal and media. You have the truth about what happened at Cross Automotive. If we combine them..." He shook his head. "The truth doesn't matter to men like him. He'll bury it before it sees daylight." Ava looked at him, steady. "Then we make it impossible to bury." For the rest of the afternoon, they worked side by side, Ava outlining the public relations strategy, Mason digging through a dusty box of old documents, photos, and engineering reports. Ethan drifted between them, sometimes listening, sometimes returning to his model engine, though Ava caught him watching her more than once, as if deciding whether she belonged in this space. By nightfall, the rain had eased, but the shop felt sealed off from the world, 2 people and a child, in the quiet eye of an approaching storm. As Mason locked up, he glanced at her. "You know, teaming up with me puts a target on your back." Ava's reply was simple. "I think the target was already there." Outside, somewhere beyond the wet streets and glowing traffic lights, Damian Cross received word that his papers had been delivered. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light like fire, and thought about the next step. Because in his mind, he hadn't just started a fight, he had already won. The courthouse smelled faintly of floor polish and old paper, a scent that clung to the air no matter the season. Mason sat at the defendant's table, his suit a little too stiff from being worn so rarely. Beside him, his lawyer shuffled papers with the calm of someone used to tense mornings. Across the aisle sat Ethan's grandparents, stiff-backed, well-dressed, their eyes flicking toward Mason with a mix of judgment and something colder. They hadn't looked at Ethan once. The boy sat quietly in the back with Ava, swinging his legs beneath the bench. He clutched the small model engine he'd built, turning it over in his hands like a talisman. Ava had promised him she'd be there. She hadn't promised she'd stay quiet. The judge entered. A gavel brought the room to order, and the custody hearing began. Mason's lawyer opened with the basics, his stable home, his dedication as a father, the absence of any reason to strip him of custody. The opposing lawyer countered with rehearsed sharpness, painting Mason as financially unstable, unable to provide proper opportunities for Ethan. It was a slow erosion, each word meant to chip away at his worth. Ava could see Mason's jaw tighten with every sentence. He didn't interrupt, didn't take the bait, but she could feel the weight pressing on him. Then, midway through, the other lawyer dropped the name. Furthermore, given Mr. Cole's history of professional misconduct at Cross Automotive, the rest of the sentence was drowned out in Ava's mind by the rush of fury that shot through her. Damian's fingerprints were all over this. He wasn't just watching, he was directing the play. She stood. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying through the room, "that allegation is false, and I can prove it." The courtroom turned toward her. Mason's eyes widened, but he didn't stop her. The judge raised a brow. "And you are?" "Ava Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Motors. Last week, Mr. Cole saved a multi-million-dollar product launch for my company in front of hundreds of witnesses and a global broadcast audience. I've reviewed the so-called misconduct reports. They were falsified to cover up Cross Automotive's liability in a fatal design flaw." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the court stenographer paused for a heartbeat. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Sinclair, do you have evidence to support that statement?" "Yes." Ava reached into her briefcase, producing a folder thick with photocopies, Mason's engineering reports, internal memos, and most damning of all, an email from Damian's own legal department instructing staff to ensure Cole takes the fall. The judge accepted the folder, skimming the first page before passing it to the clerk. "This will be entered into the record." Across the aisle, Ethan's grandparents shifted uncomfortably. Their lawyer muttered something hurriedly, but the momentum had shifted. By the time the hearing ended, the judge's ruling was clear. Custody remained with Mason, and any further challenges would require substantial new evidence. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed wet under the pale sunlight, breaking through clouds. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing, but Mason shielded Ethan with one arm. Ava stayed close, ignoring the questions hurled in her direction. When they reached the parking lot, Mason stopped, looking at her with something unspoken in his eyes. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," Ava replied, "because if Damien wants a war, he just got one." For the first time since she'd met him, Mason smiled, small but real. Ethan, still holding his model engine, glanced between them with a shy grin of his own. Somewhere, Damien Cross watched the footage on a muted television in his office, his glass of whiskey forgotten on the desk. He didn't smile this time. He poured another drink instead, and the ice cracked like a warning in the silence. The attack came 2 days later, swift and calculated. Sinclair Motors' stock dipped overnight after a wave of anonymous leaks claimed safety flaws in the very prototype Ava had unveiled. At the same time, a city inspector arrived at Cole's Auto with an order to shut down for code violations. Mason knew without reading the papers whose hand had guided both moves. By noon, Ava's board was calling emergency meetings, investors whispering about damage control. Mason's garage sat dark, the padlock on the bay door, a steel reminder that Damien Cross could strike anywhere, anytime. Ava found him there, sitting on the hood of his old pickup, Ethan nearby on the curb, silently tracing shapes in the dust with a stick. "This is what he does," Mason said, eyes fixed on the street. "Takes away your footing until you've got nothing left to stand on." Ava stepped closer. "Then we stand together." He looked at her, searching for something: doubt, fear, hesitation. But she wasn't offering any. "We have proof, Mason. Real proof. Not just of what he did to you, but how he's been manipulating the market, burying flaws, putting people at risk. If we release it, it'll ruin him." Mason's gaze flicked to Ethan, then back to her. "And if it doesn't? If he comes harder, then we keep fighting." That night, in the cramped office above Mason's garage, they pieced it all together: engineering files, confidential emails, witness statements from ex-employees, Ava's contacts tracked down. Ethan slept on the couch, curled up under Mason's jacket, the hum of the old space heater lulling him into dreams. When dawn broke, they were ready. Ava called her PR chief. Mason called an old journalist friend who'd once trusted him with a story but never got to run it. Within hours, the evidence was everywhere: front-page headlines, primetime segments, industry blogs tearing apart Cross Automotive's polished facade. Damien's denials were immediate and fierce, but the tide had shifted. Regulators opened investigations. Investors withdrew. His smirk vanished from every photo. 2 weeks later, Cole's Auto reopened. The padlock was gone, replaced by the familiar squeal of the bay door rolling up. Ava was there, leaning against the wall as Mason pulled it open, the morning sun spilling inside. "You know," she said, "I think I still owe you something." He raised a brow. "For what?" Her lips curved. "That deal we made, in front of a few hundred people." Mason chuckled, shaking his head. "Pretty sure you were joking." "Maybe." She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "But I'm not joking anymore." Ethan appeared in the doorway, holding the model engine between his hands. "If you're talking about marriage," he said with the bluntness of an 8-year-old, "I think it's a good idea." Mason glanced at his son, then at Ava, a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there weeks ago. "Guess I'm outnumbered." Not. They didn't make a grand declaration. No sweeping kiss in the middle of the street. Just a quiet, certain look between them, two people who had been thrown together by chance, tested by an enemy, and found in each other something worth holding on to. Later, as the shop filled with the sounds of work and life again, Ava caught herself watching Mason and Ethan, the boys' laughter echoing off the metal walls. She realized she hadn't just fought Damien Cross. She'd fought for this for them. And for the first time in years, she wasn't standing alone.